It was hugely challenging. It was very, very tough. But you embrace that. It's like, holy shit, what a cool idea. Why do teams from the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, military, all want to come and look at what we're doing at the Performance Institute? I ask myself that question all the time. I always talk about three things. Number one, people need to feel like they have a voice. People need to feel like they can influence the outcome of something. And then finally, I always say people need.
So today we're joined by Duncan French. Welcome, Duncan. How you doing?
Hello, mate. Yeah, good to speak to you again. It's been a little while.
It has indeed. Yeah, I'm really excited actually to delve into this. Just before we kicked off recording, we were speaking about some of the challenges you're facing at the moment. And I think there's so many commonalities there in regards to corporate space, scaling organizations, maintaining value whilst doing that. So there's going to be some brilliant nuggets, I'm sure, from this today. You've worked across such a diverse range of sports and environments, Olympic medal winning teams to NCAA universities, and now I guess the biggest global organization in mixed martial arts. The first question I'd like to ask, what is your view on diversity versus depth of experience for building world-class teams?
Well, I think you can't do without either. And I'll come back to the diversity point because it's very critical. All right. But depth of understanding at this level, at the elite level, is essential. We in our team, I always say we can teach you book smarts. People come out of college and they have levels of understanding, insight. People come with different levels of experience. But if there's a hole in your repertoire, your portfolio, we can put you in an opportunity, a professional development opportunity, a learning opportunity, whatever that might be. If we've got a hole in our portfolio, like I said, we need to fill it with a particular staff member or a number of staff members, we can create an opportunity for them to upskill, to increase that breadth of knowledge. So at the elite level that I work at right now, you can't go without people having deep insights and deep experiences and deep awareness and being content experts and subject matter experts. It's a given, okay? On top of that, you got to be a good person, right? And the cultural fit in organizations is absolutely critical, which leads me on to the first point. Diversity is absolutely something which I place value on. We need an environment that breeds thought leaders and people that can challenge the status quo. Not in a provocative sense where it's going to be disruptive to what we're trying to do, but we can't just rest on our laurels. We need people that look at the world through different angles and different approaches. Now that comes from different technical skills, whether you're a dietitian or whether you are a medical provider or whether you're a strength coach or a sports scientist. They are all polarized in their professional bias somewhat. So you inherently have that in a multi or an interdisciplinary team. But having diverse backgrounds, having diverse thought processes is critical to continue to innovate and evolve any organization, I believe. So whether it is individuals that I'm hiring from Olympic sport backgrounds or professional sport backgrounds, or collegiate sport backgrounds, or people that come from corporate America, and we're trying to integrate them into what our operation does. I'm a huge believer that we can't have a single line of sight, a single thought process, because we become very rigid and static, and that's not what we need to do to excel and succeed.
Yeah, without a doubt, and I'd love to delve into that a little later, where I was going to ask you some questions around innovation within the UFC, because it won an award for the 5th most innovative sports organization in the world. Alongside diversity within a team, you've been in multiple different jobs that require multiple different skill sets, but you've also been a researcher, a lecturer, a coach, and a leader. You're obviously very experienced in both the theory and the practical aspects of human performance. Science and art are often portrayed as these mutually exclusive or independent things. I'd love to know what you think each approach can learn from the other in building world-class teams, And how has your experience across both influenced the approach you take to building a world-class multidisciplinary team now at the Performance Institute?
Yeah, it's great. It's a great question. And I guess that's my kind of modus operandum is like, yes, I'm a huge believer in the science and the art. I don't think they are mutually exclusive, or they shouldn't be mutually exclusive if you are going to have a truly optimized operation and organization. I'm a coach at heart. I'm like that's what I love doing. I love integrating with athletes. I love supporting people. I love being in the trenches with the banter and also helping people excel at what they're doing, guiding them on a path of excellence to a hopefully a mutually agreed upon goal. Do you know what I mean? But at the heart, I'm emotionally, I'm a coach. I love coaching. And I think we can't downplay the value of experience, anecdotal experience even. We can't downplay the value of people that have seen hours and hours and hours and hours of training or, development of an athlete. I think that brings with it a certain amount of value to the conversation. And then switch hats, and yes, I'm also a scientist, right? I got my PhD, and I believe in scientific methodology and empiricism and rationalism and skepticism, so that we are constantly interrogating what we do, and it kind of goes back to my earlier conversation around what is the Performance Institute and how do we try and operate. And that comes down to having diversity and looking at making sure that when we are making decisions, they are informed and impactful decisions that are going to be effective. And certainly in the world of high performance sport, you don't have a lot of time. You don't really have hours and hours to play around and fall upon success. Ultimately, in this day and age, the rigors of training load and professionalism and even player bargaining agreements where they can only have a certain amount of time in practice or on the court or whatever it may be, NCAA rules, you do have a finite amount of time. So you have to have a super effective ROI on the engagement and the investment. And that comes back to, for me, scientific analytics and the approach to understanding the best methodology, the most successful and impactful methodology, what is transferable, what is going to be sticky in the long run, and ultimately create those physiological, psychological adaptations that you're pursuing that is going to elevate the system to a new standard. It's hard to do that just by kind of figuring it out or having a gut feeling that, well, when we did the last pre-season, we had a really good response, and therefore if we do it again the same way, we'll get the same response. That's an asinine way of thinking. So I do believe that there is value to the art. We are humans. We're working with human organisms. So how you flex and manipulate and create authentic relationships and trust and belief in a system is part of the whole ecosystem. And if we just look at a spreadsheet, we're going to miss that. We're going to miss that opportunity to connect with the human in front of us, the athlete, the coach, the corner, the assistant coach, whatever it may be. So the spreadsheet doesn't allow that piece of it. So we need the humanistic input from the coaching, the art of coaching. But yes, the spreadsheet for data and insight is a critical piece of making sure that we are progressing rather than regressing, because again, we don't have the liberty to get things wrong and try and get back to where we were before or even beyond. So always having a scientific approach is something which I support, because that way we can always understand what we are seeing in our progress and where the athlete or the team are moving towards.
And I guess falsification is a scientific process, isn't it? So understanding whether you are living based off biases or blind spots and being able to remove those through an objective lens is only going to benefit then the art element, in that you have a better understanding of whether those relationships, etc., are having the effect that you want them to. Like you say, having that combination between the two.
Yeah, and the other thing you can add to that is the placebo effect. All right, and tradition. If you look at most sports, you can usually find somewhere within a sport a dogmatic tradition that no one can actually tell you why they do it or the reason why it's effective. But this routine or this rehearsal or this time of eating before we go into competition or doing this with pulling my left sock up before my right sock, whatever it may be, you see a lot of placebo impact through dogma and tradition, which again, you can use scientific insights to say, well, actually, it is an effective process. It's worth keeping in this routine, this traditional behavior, this traditional performance pattern, because now it has become so ingrained that it is if we take it away and remove it, the athletes actually are compromised by the removal of something which might not have any particular impact on outcome success, but because it is now so embedded and traditional, the performance behavior change, if you remove it, becomes a problem. So there's lots of different things, like you say, whether it's blind spots, whether it's anecdotes, whether it's coach's eye, whether it's placebo effect, you can still validate them and justify them through some scientific methods, not to quash the coaching and the art of coaching.
And I guess to put it from the perspective of people who might be listening, maybe that work in a corporate setting, the organizations that I've spoken to have understandably, just like sport and military environments, these traditions, especially if they've been, around for a while, deep-rooted beliefs, behaviors, and ultimately that informs the culture. There's definitely, like you say, something to be said for the placebo effect and letting that be a powerful contributor towards high performance. But when you potentially determine that it may be to the detriment, how do you approach maybe challenging status quo without threatening maybe the identity or the values or the beliefs of those that you're working with?
Well, I think you just nailed it. Okay. Ultimately, you're talking about other people's identity, their embedded core values, their true beliefs, whether they have an understanding or not, has become something that has become core to them. So the method and the mechanism by which you blow that up, you have to essentially tread very lightly. There needs to be a articulate way of challenging someone's core values or core beliefs, which is not easy to do in any way, shape, or form. But that's where I think coming with evidence and efficacy for and against, to give people a coherent argument as to why there might be a more optimal way, or a transition from where they are now into different ways of doing it. It doesn't need to go from black to white overnight. We can sit in grey, and we can sit in different shades of grey. And I think there's an art and a skill to being able to manipulate other people's thoughts and values. But going into that conversation as a sports scientist or in any organization where you see something that just isn't making sense and you want to challenge that and change it, we have to go into that in a very what's the word I'm looking for? A very open mind, that ultimately I'm coming and trying to change someone else's beliefs and methods, and that they might be very rigid around that. So that might be a prickly and a challenging situation that we have to navigate through. So the stick is probably not going to be the best answer there. We have to start looking at the carrot a little bit and try to manipulate people's awareness, their insights, their beliefs, using different pieces of information, aggregated data, evidential case studies, whatever it may be, to try and start to nudge them towards a new level of insight.
I remember being introduced to, I think it's Cialdini's Principles of Influence a while back, and that was just so enlightening because it was quite a few years ago now, and up until then I think I'd been quite objective when maybe trying to explain things that challenged beliefs or certain traditions, and that was really beneficial. The principles of reciprocity, all of these kinds of things. And at the end of the day, you've said that word there, which I think gets seen as like a dark art, manipulation. The key, doesn't it, comes down to whether it's ethical ultimately, as long as it's contributing towards what this athlete's desired outcome is, or this business person or performer. That's part of your job, isn't it, as a coach, is to help facilitate that achievement.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole reason why I'm there, or any coach is there. I mean, and again, usually things are not a straight line from A to B. If that's been your experience as a coach, giddy up to you. I mean that's not my experience. Okay, there's lots of peaks and troughs, and navigating the highs, navigating the lows is very challenging. So going into any coaching scenario, whether you are coaching and leading a team in a corporate setting, and whether you're working in one-to-one executive leadership, or whether you're working with an athlete, you've got to go into these understanding that you need a plan B, a plan C, a plan D. And there needs to be having a diverse skill set, and the adaptability within your coaching skill set. I think is really important, because never is it a linear progression to success or a desired outcome. There's always going to be hurdles, and I think the best coaches are those ones that can keep athletes on track, keep them motivated, keep the system moving forward towards clearly defined outcome goals. But can do that in such a fashion that they can navigate the hurdles and the speed bumps, and they almost don't miss a beat within the process, and it becomes part of the process. We have to go through some trials and tribulations, and we can use those trials and tribulations as fire and ammunition and fuel to get back to where we need to be on that that linear regression line that we hope to drive us to success.
And it's obvious that what you've helped create, alongside undoubtedly many others, the UFC Performance Institute services and the support that you guys offer, is world leading. And I think the envy of many professional sports teams out there. To try and summarize it and not have it as too open-ended question, what are the, say, maybe 3 or 4 key steps you personally have taken to create that world-class multidisciplinary team that you have?
Yeah, and this is probably going to sound, very remedial in nature, right? And oh yeah, no shit Sherlock type scenario, right? But when we first opened the doors to the Performance Institute, it was a brand new entity, right? So the first thing that I wanted to do is get normative data. We have to understand what normal is, and what above average is, and what below average is. So we spent 12 to 18 months just aggregating our insights, interrogating the sport, trying to understand some of the trends that have happened in recent years within the sport, looking at historical data versus present day data, and competition statistics and injury characteristics. Our injury surveillance and auditing was a huge part of that process, and really starting to define our epidemiological type data, which we can then reference at every single point. I always talk about reverse engineering competition. It's very vogue in sports performance in this day and age, but we have to understand what the North Star is. Where are we going, or where do we need to get to win a world championship? And that's the same for any sport. Okay. We're not punching in the destination on the GPS. We're just driving around the streets. There's many different ways and routes to get to the end point, but we needed to understand what that was. So the first thing we did was define normal, and define above average. What's best in class, right? We spent a lot of time doing that. Secondly, the mandate that I implement for the team is an interdisciplinary fashion. It's not multidisciplinary. We have multiple different services, okay, but they can still work independently. What we have to do is prioritize the integration of those services in an interdisciplinary fashion. So we talk about multidisciplinary insights with interdisciplinary solutions. Okay, so each team, each domain, each department is going to look at athlete X, Y, or Z, athletes in their own particular fashion that they're going to prioritize. But then my job as kind of the puppet master is to try and push these together, to force these together. So we definitely are coming away with integrated solutions, which is ultimately going to compound the benefit, hopefully. And then, so it was kind of define normal and best in class, work in an integrated fashion. And then it was having very efficient and robust monitoring and tracking systems. So we've done a lot of iteration around our diagnostic assessments, what they are, why we do them, are they valuable or not. There was things 4 years ago that we were swearing blind was absolutely the best thing that you needed to do to assess a mixed martial artist. Now they've fallen by the wayside and we've found something better. We've iterated, we've ideated, and we've found something that's got more power to its use. But we've stripped back a lot of fat. We've taken a lot of the fat off our objectivity and our objective assessments, but they are core to what we do. And that, again, that drives our insights to make our decisions around the left or right fork in the road. So that's some of the core things that we work to. And listen, we want to have fun while we're doing it. We want a really vibrant group of staff. And I always say environment shapes behaviors, not the other way around. Okay, so we want to create environments that drive high performance behaviors for our athletes and our coaches and our team members and our staff. Okay, so what do we need to do within the environment that makes it now become a subconscious behavioral, pattern that we've influenced by the nature of what we've created either here at the Performance Institute or out there in the community, or at our events, whatever it may be. So certainly looking into the power of the environment and what that means to the ongoing success. Like why do teams from the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, military all want to come and look at what we're doing at the Performance Institute? I ask myself that question all the time because it continues to happen. 7 years down the road, this morning I've woken up and there's an email from special military operators asking to come and spend a certain amount of time with us, understanding our system. So people have still got an interest and a belief that what we're doing here is very valuable. And I try to strip that back and understand it. And then that goes back to some of the points I've just spoken to there, I believe.
Yeah, fascinating. I remember, I think it was Owen Eastwood speaking about a conversation he'd had actually with your old employee at the EIS and them basically citing some research around 70% of the behaviors they observed were influenced by environment they determined. And, it makes total sense, doesn't it? And it's really nicely summarized there in regards to those key steps that you take. And actually, it's quite similar to the 5 areas that I've broken down high-performing teams into. The first one that you spoke about was having purpose, understanding who you are, what you're trying to achieve, and how you want to do it, and understanding where you're currently at, basically, in relation to that. You've mentioned the people aspect of it. That's the second one. And then the problem, where are we now? Where do we need to go? It is very clear. It sounds like you've done a hell of a lot of work to understand that. I remember reading the cross-section analysis of the UFC athlete that you put together, and that was probably one of the most thorough deep dives into understanding the sport, and I think without a doubt will have benefited people who worked within mixed martial arts, but also probably set the bar for everyone else that works in sport to really become, experts in their sport, not just in the domain that they work within their sport. And then the proof aspect, that final one that you spoke about, how are you constantly reflecting and iterating and trying to find through scientific method. You've spoken about those objective means of quantifying progress and understanding what success looks like and constantly removing these ideas that you have and testing them objectively. So it makes total sense. And that's something that I don't think people in the corporate space will never necessarily have the luxury to do, to go in and spend 12 to 18 months understanding before they act. But there's a huge amount that can be taken there, obviously, in regards to following those principles and those steps to be able to create an environment that breeds those sorts of behaviors and beliefs that you spoke about.
Yeah, I think it's critical. Like I said, I think the environment that we create, the culture, and there's best-selling New York Times bestsellers written on culture and building teams and extreme ownership and all this type of stuff, right? So I've got my own interpretation of that, which I try and instill and reinforce with our team here. But when you start to think about culture, for me, that's those subconscious behaviors that people are just going through processes and procedures that are perceived as best in class by others, but to ourselves are normal, and I think that's really looking at how you establish that, how you get a whole team moving in the same direction, a belief system, pulling in the same direction for a mission and a vision of what we want to stand for. We do a lot of work within our team around interrogating our ongoing values. We look at core values. We try to understand the core values of the team as a whole, but also and the unified identity of the team, but also the individual core values of each staff member. What do they want to achieve from a career perspective? What do they want to achieve within their life? Taking time to understand that, I think, is a valuable use of time, because again, it's going to allow us to understand how we communicate better, how we interact with our colleagues and our team members, our teammates better. It's a huge part. The belief system, an individual belief system and a unified collective belief system aren't always perfectly aligned. All right. But we need to try to bring them closer together, or as close together as possible. Because when someone's core values and their personal beliefs align with a organizational belief and vision, then amazing things start to happen. People are hugely motivated. People buy in and want to pull, the hard yards for the benefit of the organization themselves and others. So that work is something that we consciously try to, put into place on an annual basis. I take my team away. We do offsite retreats. We get away from the day-to-day grind, and we do, powerful resets to bring everybody back into place. And what I would say, just one other caveat on that, is it's very hard for new staff members to come into a team with such a powerful identity like ours here at the Performance Institute, and feel like they belong and feel like they're connected on day one. I think they always come in and they're very excited on, I've got a new job at the UFC, or I've been recruited to the Performance Institute. But that's very different to like how impactful and effective are you going to be. So we have to do a lot of work with them, upskilling them to get them to, to the same awareness and beliefs of what our organization is.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, the data that I've collected with the organizations that I've worked with or supported, and we're talking from professional sports teams into to elite military units to the corporate space, 95% of those organizations said that they had a clear origin story, vision, and mission, but only 1 in 2 people felt a deep sense of connection to that. And exactly what you've spoken about there, it's great having them, but do you understand actually each individual's values, their vision and mission for what they want to be a part of, and help them, I guess, to connect to that is the real key, rather than saying, right, this is what we're all here for, all get behind this. Is the level of individuality that it sounds like you take to be able to actually create that connection.
Yeah, listen, I'm a huge believer in kind of Richard Branson's mentality of upskill your staff and make them such good professionals that other organizations want to recruit them, but create an environment that is so powerful that they don't want to leave. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm a huge believer in that. So I spend a lot of time trying to understand with my staff, like where do you want to go in your career? What do you want to do? And if the Performance Institute is a stepping stone within that career development, then I need to get the best out of you for that 2 to 5 years, whatever it is, as a stepping stone. Now, hopefully you don't see it as a stepping stone, but at least I now have a projection of what you want to do, where you want to get to, how you want to grow, in your career. And then I try to understand how we can align with that. How can we be part of that process? So often there's I don't want to say an arrogance, but when it's interesting, there's a bit of a roundabout way of answering this question, right? One thing which I have a little bit of a bugbear with when I do interviews is interview candidates. When you say what's your motivation for wanting to apply for this role, interview candidates will say, well, I want this for my career. I think it's going to help me do this. I think it's going to help me get to this or do what I want to do, or it's going to give me an opportunity to get in the space where I want to play. And I'm sitting there as the hiring manager going, well, hold on, what am I getting from this? You seem to be getting a lot, but you've not told me what you're going to bring to me. And that's kind of the most important thing right now is like, how can you join my team and help me that's going to make me want to hire you? So if you take that same principle, but actually flip it and engage in that conversation around what do they want? What are they trying to achieve? I can now package that and I can keep it on file, and I have a record of like all the different things that they want to progress into from a career approach. And we can get mutual benefit. So by being part of the Performance Institute, hopefully you will get that career advancement and that career exposure that motivates you and brings you to work every day and excites you to give your best work and the best version of yourself. But also when you ever go out into the field, you're working at such a high standard that the Performance Institute is by association benefiting from you and your personal brand. So I always talk about this mutual benefit, this ecosystem of what are we doing to help you within your career growth? But what can you give us back? Because it has to be a two-way situation. Like, what's the organization getting from you, and what can we give you, you as being part of our team? And I think that's where you start to really understand people's motivations, their values, what they see benefit on from claiming a paycheck, but the work that goes into that paycheck. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, without a doubt, you've got that synergy there, haven't you? And both are reinforcing each other. And when people feel valued,
it's not always the case, right? It's not always the case. I've been in some organizations at the most elite level, at the highest level, and I'm like, this is just not working for me, or there's something that it's just not sitting right. I feel like I'm either overworked and underpaid, which is often the case, or I'm being asked to do things which are beyond my job description, or I'm going down an avenue of workload which is not necessarily where I thought I was getting into. All these types of things are going to be hits on morale and motivation. And as soon as there is a psychological hit on motivation, then the engagement, the dedication, the passion, the desire to go above and beyond. It's not easy to say, all right, well, we're going to have a world-class system. We want to be best in class. That rolls off the tongue, but executing that and trying to deliver it every day and believing in it and trying to say, well, what is best in class and how are we different or advancing this whole narrative? That's a cross to bear, right? That takes a lot of effort and energy.
Yeah. And I mean, what you said there in regards to things that you've seen that haven't sat well with you, I think rings so true. I've been really fortunate to be a part of some of the world's best teams and cultures, but it's actually the mistakes I've made, but also the experiences I've had that weren't positive, that I think have more shaped now how I go about working with companies and the type of environments I try to help them to create, and the connection and belonging and that side of things. And it sticks with you, doesn't it? And it's not something that you've read in a textbook on an MBA. It's something that you've lived, and something that what it feels like when it's done right, and it feels phenomenal and when it's not. And if you can leverage that, you can create an environment just like you guys have, where people feel that they belong and they feel like they're valued, and it's somewhere that they want to be, and also it gets known for that, and then attracts some of the best talent out there, people with the same, values and perspective of you guys.
Yeah, I hope that's the case. I do hope that's the case. And like I say, I personally dedicate a lot of my time to try and understand that with my team members and my teammates. And the other thing is that, the optic is different for everybody on a team. When we first opened the Performance Institute, we had 7 staff members. Now I have 26 staff members here in Las Vegas. I have another 24 in China, soon to be 18 in Mexico. The team is growing exponentially. Everybody has a different optic to what we are trying to do. So, a high-level PhD sports scientist is looking at what we're doing very differently to our, athlete services coordinator on the front desk doing concierge service with our athletes as they come and go, looking at scheduling and athlete experience and their, time in the facility. That's different to our medical providers working, at the facility, but also going on the road and working at events in Brazil or, Russia or China or wherever it may be, right? So everyone's got very different and personal optics to the team, to the system. And I think team leaders like myself and people in positions of direct report, they have to be cognizant that not everyone's looking at this the way I'm looking at it. I'm setting the vision and the mandate, but then I've got to actually step back and try and have some awareness, some conscious understanding of how is my athlete service coordinator perceive what we're doing here today? How is my dietitian looking at it? How is my MMA coach in China figuring out what they're trying to do over there from talent development? So, it's a very challenging jigsaw puzzle to then try and figure out,
No, definitely. And you've spoken there about creating an environment that attracts ultimately the best people. But what are the 2 or 3 non-negotiables that you look for when recruiting, and how much weight do you place on character and values compared to skills and experience, and how do you actually factor this into the hiring process?
Yeah, it's tough, right? Recruitment, I believe, is the most important thing. It's the most important thing that you have to. It's challenging, right? You have to take the time to get it right. You have to do your due diligence, and you have to have a system in place that gets you the answers as a recruiter, that gets you the answers that you're seeking. Now, I believe character is a huge part of that. As I've already mentioned, that kind of like book smarts are, I don't want to say a given, but we need people with high experience and experience at the cold face that we're working at. Do you know what I mean? So if someone's only ever worked in a hospital setting, but we're working in professional sports, it's a tough jump to make, right? If you don't actually have any of that experience and expertise. I'm not going to say it can't be done, because if you come with the right character, you come with the right awareness, the right self-awareness, but the right engagement to make the jump, then we'll support that, right? It's not that I'm only hiring people that only ever been to 20 Olympic Games and that's it, right? Comes back to diversity. We want people that have got different ideas to bring to make us better, but they need powerful self-awareness. They need good drive and determination, and they need to know that they ultimately need to fit in a different environment and ecosystem. So character is a huge part. We're all working on a team, right? It's a collaborative team where one of my mandates is interdisciplinary service support, right? So you have to be comfortable at working with others. You can't bark down another technical department if you think you're right and they're wrong. Like, we have to come to an approach to finding solutions. So yes, character is critical. I always hire on character first and book smarts second, if I'm really simplifying things. As I said, we can give you book smarts, we can upskill you, we can give you professional development. But in this level of elite sport, you kind of taking it somewhat for granted that people are already coming with a good level of expertise anyway, because I can't upskill you too much, but we can get you very niche development. The role of the recruitment process in that is critical. Now, without wanting to give away too many of my secrets, we try to obviously give our candidates the opportunity to have some preparation. Come and present something to us that you have presented, you've researched, you've investigated, interrogated, and you've had time to think about. We also look at people's ability to make reactionary decisions and solve problems and interrogate information in a very chaotic type scenario, which is pretty impulsive and reactive, and we don't give the candidates too much opportunity to prepare and come with a nicely crafted approach, which is on a lovely PowerPoint or whatever it may be. It's a bit more grassroots and spit and sawdust, which is the day-to-day world that we live in. And then we obviously have a pretty robust opportunity for Q&A, which goes down some very particular avenues as well. So for me, the key things are around problem solving, and problem solving expertise, and the ability to define a clear picture of what the outcome is, and then how many different solutions and different approaches can they implement to try and get to this said solution. That's problem solving. And every day, particularly in this world here at the UFC, to the normal person, it might seem very chaotic and on all over the place, but that's just the nature of solving problems from someone that lives in Brazil versus someone that lives in Florida, someone that lives in Poland. It's all the time we're working with these different challenges and problems. And my best operators are the ones that can flex and pivot and embrace the chaos and thrive in the chaos somewhat.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So many things that you said there which resonate, and there's a lot there to be said around that character-based hiring, and also almost picking for potential. Like you say, they need to obviously be experts in their area in regards to depth, but also the ability to adapt on the fly, to not be overwhelmed when, for lack of a better term, shit does hit the fan. And there's a lot there that reminded me of Special Forces selection. And on another episode, I've spoken with an individual who was one of the leaders in recruitment and that selection process. And what you've described there almost sounds like a UFC version of that, very similar in regards to principles. And in essence, all that did was lay on physical fatigue and psychological fatigue to strip back all the layers that we want to portray to the world of who we are or who we want to be, and actually gets to the nitty gritty of who we really are, our values, and ultimately leaning into that gives you far more, as it sounds like your process does, than sitting down with someone over a desk and asking them, give me an example of when you've, you know, shown this or adapted to that. You know, you've got to see it. I mean,
it's, you know, I'm not hiring you because you've got a nice suit on and you've thought about what you're dressing and you've been able to craft this lovely PowerPoint presentation. But that's absolutely part of it. Like, I want you to go away. I'm going to give you some time and you go and kick the backside out of really understanding what it is that I'm potentially asking you. All right. So you have the opportunity to bring foresight and insight and thought to the process. But then I'm going to drop you into what is your day-to-day environment where you should thrive. You should absolutely thrive, whether that's in the weight room, whether that's in the medical clinic, whether that's on operations. We're going to put you in an environment like your special forces guys that, like, this feels normal to me. Like, this is where I thrive. I'm in the weight room. Like, there should be no nerves. Like, you should just, like, be able to understand exactly what we're getting at in what is your preferred environment. And then on top of that preferred environment, then we're going to throw in some curveballs. We're going to layer on the respective incremental challenges. And so, right, well, you are thriving, but what do you do if this happens? Or what happens in this scenario? Are you still going to thrive? And then you start to be able to break down people's processing skills a little bit, and you can then get to the person inside. You can start to understand how they think and why they do a particular method or approach. And again, now I'm really starting to get insight into what this potential staff member or candidate is going to bring to our team. It's funny because my current strength coach, he's now doing a few kind of interviews with me now presently. And I've kind of opened up my processes, and he's like, "Oh, you did that to me, and I didn't even know what you were doing." I was like, "Yeah, this is," and so he now sees the benefit of it. In you know, the argument, the cat and mouse around, you're saying it's black, but I think it's white. What do we do now? Like, are you throwing all the toys out the pram, or are you actually still going to deduce and have a thoughtful process to trying to figure out why the answer is the answer that we're presenting to you? So yeah, it's a pretty robust process, but we've had great success with implementing those types of approaches.
Yeah, without a doubt. That's brilliant. So with UFC Performance Institutes in Las Vegas, Shanghai, Mexico, Abu Dhabi. You're growing rapidly across continents and cultures. How have you approached the challenge of maintaining world-class teams as you've scaled from ultimately one team in Vegas to a more decentralized team of team structure? And then how do you approach the challenge of creating a unifying vision? Because you've spoken about that across these diverse cultures.
Yeah, it's very challenging. I'm not going to say it's easy, okay? But again, I think each of our, we talk about the larger UFC Performance Institute, the Global Performance Institute. We are a network of institutes. We're a network of hub sites that create the institute. An institute is a place of learning, a place of sharing and insight. So we obviously want to embrace that institute type mentality, and then we put that out into our global network. I think what I then try to do is acknowledge that there are very different cultural and geographical differences between our sites. Okay. So, the culture of a Chinese operation is very different to the cultural operation in Las Vegas. It's going to be very different to a Latin American operation in Mexico City. And having some awareness and thought around those, I think, is part of partly drives how successful they will be. So, clearly setting mandates and missions that are unified at the top of the pyramid for everybody. What are you bringing to the institute? Basically, what is your role? What do you need to do for the greater institute? Is something where we're all aligning to that mission, the overarching mission statement. What do we want to be to the athlete community on a global scale? Then you drive it down to your KPIs and your goals and objectives on a more regional level. And they're different. Okay. They have to be different, because they're doing different things, different challenges, different team size, et cetera, et cetera. And even if we have a technical academy for talent development in one place and we have another talent development academy in another place, they're not the same. They're going to be different because the athletes are different, the coaches that they work with are different, the environment's different, the performance behaviors in that region are going to be very different. So it would be naive to think it's going to be, we'll take this and we'll drop it over here and it's going to work fine. So we essentially build each one from the ground up to make sure that it has its own identity and its own processes and methods. But we have to have an overarching binding factor that brings us together, and that is the belief in what the overarching mission of the Performance Institute is.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And you spoke earlier around understanding each individual's values and maybe vision or mission from a personal perspective.
Yeah.
How do you then go about connecting that to this larger vision for the organization? Is it very much a decentralized approach where the leadership for each performance institute, and you could use the analogy here of a global organization who have a Asia office,
yep,
an America's office, etc. Is that the approach you take? Do you have the decentralized leadership structure that's something that each Performance Institute will take upon themselves to do?
Yeah, very, very much so. I mean, ultimately, yes, I sit at the top of the organization for the Performance Institute. So what we're ultimately doing in each of the venues it falls on my shoulders. But I'm also not a micromanager, right? I hire good people, I get out of the way and I'll let them do their work. And they can be creative however they want to do that work. Okay. I'm not really going to get too much in the way of people's ideations and processes of how they think they need to solve the problems and create solutions that we're talking to. But I'm definitely going to bookend it in terms of where are we and where do we get to within a period of time. That's my job, is to interrogate and quality assure, the success of the system. But, allowing people the responsibility and the ownership of the process, again, I think is critical. I mean, number one, I don't have enough bandwidth to be aware of everything that they're doing in China, aware of everything they're doing in Mexico, and aware of everything that we're doing in Las Vegas on a day-to-day basis. It's just not possible. So again, we hire good people. We hire very competent people that have the independence, the responsibility, that take the ownership, that know, that what is the mission. They're bought into the vision and the mission. They know where the North Star is, and then ultimately they're going to pursue it. And like I say, I don't get in the way too much. And there is local leadership on a larger scale, but also within each of the technical areas that works very well. And then we have more global technical leadership that comes out of Las Vegas to again support into China, to support into Mexico. So it's not just leadership from myself across the whole organization. We need technical leadership within each of the different departments to ensure that they meet my mandate. And that's where I work with those, departmental leads to make sure that they're across, what my ambitions are.
Yeah, definitely. And your phrase there around you find people who are highly capable and who can do that, and you don't need to micromanage them, just reminded me again of a quote that was up on the wall for the Special Forces unit that I've worked for the past, 5 years before setting up the company, which was find the right man and let him get on with the job. And I think that's probably a slight oversimplification. Otherwise, life might be a little less stressful for you. But ultimately, as you've said very well, it's probably the most influential factor on that ability to operate, I guess, on a global scale, alongside having that unifying vision at the top that allows you to be successful as you scale, I'm guessing.
Well, I always talk about three things as a staff member, whether you're top of the tree or whether you are, a new person, first day on the job. I always talk about three things. Number one, people need to feel like they have a voice so that they can make their opinion and discuss things and have psychological safety that whatever they say, it's not going to be like crushed, and their voice counts. That's really important. And we try to create forums proactively. We try to get forums as well as opportunities for people to voice their opinion. But on the floor, wherever it may be in our operation, people need to come forth and feel confident that they've got a voice and their voice counts. And we're going to process their opinion. Might not always be the opinion we go with, but they've got a voice. People need to feel like they can influence the outcome of something. All right. So they're not just spinning their wheels. They need to feel like whatever the work that they're doing is constructive, it's beneficial, and it's impactful to the outcome. Because again, there's purpose. All right. So people need to have purpose to what they're doing as well and feel that purpose. And then finally, I always say people need a responsibility, so that they are a go-to person. All right, you're a mini expert in whatever it may be, and we're all now going to pivot and listen to you because you're our person that is our neck strength expert, or our concussion expert, or the weight diet expert, or the wrestling expert versus the striking expert. Like, people need to feel that they have an accelerated responsibility somewhere or a niche that is very much theirs to own. And again, if you give people a voice, give them a purpose, and give them responsibility, I think you start to get towards team members that are motivated and bought into the process, because they can see where they fit in the bigger machinery of the whole organization.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. It has some similarities as well, I guess, with self-determination theory too, in those three areas, and autonomy and that side of things. And it sounds like you guys do a good job at being able to create that. So moving on from you guys growing rapidly, you've been ranked the 5th most innovative organization in sport. You've basically transported one of the oldest sports in the world into every living room in the world. And I remember seeing the innovative spirit when you created Fight Island in Abu Dhabi when COVID hit, in a time where a lot of organizations switched straight into survival mode. The question I'd like to ask is, how did the organization reframe COVID as an opportunity rather than a threat? And then off the back of that, how do you create the conditions for that level of innovation?
Yes, I think it's interesting, right? Because that's not just a narrative that the Performance Institute has created. That's probably a wider UFC organization experience. And I think it comes from a few things. Listen, Dana White is a genius at what he does, whether you love him or hate him. The guy's a genius, right? And he will not say no. He's going to find a way. And I think that's the warrior spirit, it's the fighter within us. I mean, like as part of our company wide mandates, we are all fighters is one of the things that we talk about, right? And that's Dana. He's not going to say no. He's not going to roll over and die. He's going to fight through something and find a way. But we also work in a sport that is very polarizing in nature. It's fighting, it's combat, right? And it's polarizing to everyone's opinions. People love the UFC. Some people can't stand the UFC or MMA, right? They think it's barbaric. So it's polarizing in nature. What that gives us is the opportunity to say, okay, well, we're already a social disruptor. Let's just do things first. Let's just be first. Let's just go ahead and try it, because the way the company is perceived by the public is already polarized. Like the English Premier League or the NFL or the NBA wants to be mainstream, right? Well, by its nature, this sport is not mainstream. It's a little bit polarized. And that gives us this kind of playing field of opportunity to say, F this, we're going to do it anyway, right? We don't care what you think, right? So that's kind of, again, a little bit at the core of the company. So when you've got someone like Dana driving the bus and you've got this opportunity to say, all right, we're just going to play around and figure things out and do things differently, and we don't care what people think. You create this great melting pot of opportunity for innovation. Fight Island was obviously a huge part of that. Now that was like, okay, Dana, we've got COVID. You can't be around in public. Okay, well, we're going to put the fights on an island, a physical island, right? Which it was Yas Island in Abu Dhabi, right? So the military basically blocked off the tunnel onto the island, so nobody could get on and off the island apart from UFC representatives. So there's a little bit of a disconnect between Dana going, right, we're going to have all of our fights on an island, and then the logistics of operationalizing that mandate. I mean, listen, it was hugely challenging. It was very, very tough. But you embrace that. It's like, holy shit, what a cool idea. Like, yeah, let's have fights on an island. Let's go do that. That's crazy. So then around the parameters of medical care and all the limitations of travel and the restrictions, then you start to say, okay, well, what are we doing? And you go back to first principles, right? And you start ticking things off. And then, you embrace the chaos and you normalize it. And then you go back to your first principles of, all right, what are we trying to achieve? It's just a different environment. The environment's changed, but the process has to remain the same. We're trying to make sure athletes are healthy, they're optimized for performance, that they're fed and watered, and that they're in the octagon and we're putting on a great show. So being able to connect those things is where the entrepreneurial spirit really came from. Do you know what I mean?
Without a doubt, yeah. It sounds like it's a natural byproduct of the origin story, and it's obviously a value that's ingrained in the way people think every single day, isn't it? From what it sounds like as disruptors, that's part of the identity, and I guess that's part of the allure as well for individuals who maybe haven't worked with that level of autonomy or freedom to be, challenging status quo and innovating in that way before. They're now being given that with the support that you've spoken about previously. And those two things, I remember it was a researcher at Loughborough who summarized a lot of the research around leadership into three key areas. And the first one was vision, having that unifying vision. The second was challenge, having extremely high standards and expecting those. But the third was support, and basically you can't turn up any one of those notches without the others being there too. And it sounds like you've all got this beautiful melting pot of the vision and the strong origin story of who you are, your innovators, your disruptors, and you want to change the game of MMA forever. But then you're also providing an extremely high level of support for those individuals to be able to step out. And you've spoken about that psychological safety. How do you go about creating psychological safety within the teams that you work in?
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, prospect theory is real. Okay. So there's a pretty good body of evidence around humans make decisions now not to fail rather than to succeed. All right. So the fear of failure has actually grown in the population over the last, 20, 30 years as well. All right. And now when, some data from Instinct Labs that, I think it's 4 times the amount of decisions are made not to fail rather than actually to succeed, which is quite scary, right? So, that's brought on by people's anxiety of either global perception, social media perception, how my boss is going to see my decision making. And now you're putting yourself in the wrong mindset, right? So it's no longer entrepreneurial. It's very defensive in nature. And it's about, all right, well, how do I do something that's not wrong rather than something that's really right? I think that psychological safety and having the boldness to go ahead and try it comes from an environment where the repercussions are accepted regardless. Now, when you're in a professional sport and the margins of success and the need for success, like succeed now, it can be very challenging. And certainly, I think to another lifetime for me in different teams and things, opportunity is not as great. Okay, sometimes it gets suppressed because, rather than people trying to look for opportunity, people don't want to make mistakes. So comfort now becomes part of the process. And, there's a sense of protection, all right, and security. I think what I try to do with my staff in this space is allow them freedom to play. I don't really chastise, people's opportunity to develop new ideas, go away and play, come up with a new methodology, come up with a new supplement stack, come up with a new treatment approach. All right, if we put this and this together, does that make sense? Like, I'm not chastising those things. I'm actively promoting them. And like all inventors, whether it's they have so many prototypes that fail. All right. The iPhone was however many iterations before they landed on the iPhone, right? It wasn't the first drawing that, they made over Apple. So, allowing people to iterate and ideate and fail, I think is all part of the process, but doing that in an environment that allows them to do it. So we have kind of diagnostic tiers, whether it's tier 1 or tier 2, and our tier 3 diagnostics, our assessments, that's all what I would call applied sports science. It's all innovation diagnostics. So we don't really implement them on a wide distribution to the fighters right now. It's more go and play in the sandpit and just see what can be done. So that's kind of how I try to promote it here. But again, psychological safety is making sure, staff knowing that, their boss, their immediate report is not going to do something detrimental to their position in the company based on a decision that they made or not made. Like they're making multiple decisions every single day. We can't make a judgment on one single factor, even if it was something that was wrong. So, like I say, in some leagues and some organizations, when you're talking about life or death in the military or whatever it may be, I think there's a time and a place. Then you start to say, well, it's not yes or no, it's just when, right? When do we try and look at it? And again, if it's military operations and war games and things like that, there's a reason why they do those, because it's compartmentalized and the risk is reduced, right? So same thing in this environment. We're looking at the time and the opportunities of when to play our war games.
Yeah, without a doubt. And one of the challenges that is quite obvious in the corporate space as opposed to sport and military is the ratio of training to competing. And in the corporate space, the amount of time actually spent on training is obviously significantly less.
Right.
What would you do if you didn't have anywhere near the same amount of time to promote the innovative mindset and the freedom to explore? If you were more time pressured, maybe. I mean, I'm speaking to a man who I know is extremely time pressured 24/7 with your role. So maybe it doesn't necessarily apply as much to you, but compared to maybe some of the athletes What would you do if you were in the corporate space, wanting to be highly innovative, but maybe not having that same degree of freedom or space to get creative as often as you'd like?
That's a really good question. It's a really good question. And I'm obviously naive to part of the response, right? But what I would say, and this might be ducking a response, I immediately go to technical priorities, okay? Because if you are in an organization that is constantly competing, for want of a better term, rather than training and elevating skill sets, the return on investment of any type of time needs to be emphasized, all right? So my approach would be to look at the technical priorities that sit across our whole organization and come up with the top 3 to 5, right? So now that everybody is working to the same technical priorities, and there'll have been a process of evaluation and knowledge sharing and knowledge capture that allows us to land on whatever the 5 or 4 technical priorities are. And now moving forwards, you can do innovation pieces, but it has to be against one of these technical priorities. You can't just go off and start playing in the sandpit and doing something that's completely abstract, because if we do that and multiply it by a workforce of 1,000 people, we've got 1,000 problems, right? Trying to be solved. Whereas if we have 5 and now we're all working towards the same 5, we're just sharpening the spear, and the likelihood of having outputs that are more effective, more useful, more impactful at the end of it, I probably naively perceive would be a better way to go. But that does require some legwork up front to take your workforce and say, all right, we all need to evaluate what we're trying to do. What is success in whatever business that we're doing? How do we define success, which is what I would do as with athletes? What is the competition playing field? How do I win in that competition playing field? What are the determinants of success or the determinants of performance? And what increases the probability of success? And align my organization innovation to those 3 or 4 things that we've all agreed upon are important. And then once we've done that, innovation can potentially happen at a more micro level, but you still know it's coming back to the main buckets that you've defined. And it's not just like innovation for innovation's sake. That's kind of the way I respond to your question. It's kind of a representation of what we do here. Because again, you're just prioritizing things, right? It's not free for all. Like, our innovation has to be useful and worthwhile. But it's still pointed in a particular direction.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And I guess actually nicely links in with the research around adding constraints to amplify innovation too. If you have too much space to explore, the research tends to show people aren't as creative. They don't manage to reframe problem sets in the same way or look at things with different perspectives because they're forced to. So there's a nice commonality.
That's this thing. The constraint was make a phone with one button. That's a pretty rigid constraint, but they figured it out, and everyone was pulling in the same direction with that one constraint, one technical priority. It can only have one button. So, yeah,
they sold a few of them. Yeah,
kind of.
So, if you don't mind, I'd love to finish up on something that you posted a while back, which was a speech made by Kirby Smart, who is the head coach of 2-time national champions Georgia Bulldogs, about the cost of leadership. And it's an area that is very often neglected or not spoken about. It's not sexy. It's not necessarily exciting. If you don't mind sharing with us, what have been your biggest challenges as a leader so far? And can you share a moment in your career where you felt your leadership was truly tested? And how did you navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll preface it by saying a few things. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because usually when you're moving into positions of leadership, you start moving away from the nuts and bolts of what you're good at, right? So as a practitioner or as a provider or as a professional, when you progress, whether that's time in the job or whether that's standards of work that you deliver, hopefully you progress within your career, you end up moving away a little bit from ultimately what you're good at, what you got there for, which is a really weird thing. All right. I found it very strange. I was like,
Yeah.
holy cow, like actually now I'm not doing the reason why I've been promoted is because I did that really well, not because I do this really well.
Mm-hmm.
And that I'm learning this job now kind of on the fly sometimes. Like you don't have the credentials and the expertise always for promotion to do new work tasks and workflows that historically you've not had to do because they require leadership or management or budgeting or evaluations of others, etc., quality assurance, all these types of things. Like I was just in my own world, and now I've got to think about 44 other people's worlds, not just my own, right? So it's a really unique dynamic that I think you go through when you move into leadership. And then what happens is you can no longer be perceived as not knowing what's going on. Like I can't be in a position of leadership and go, well, actually, I don't know the first thing about how to do a personal evaluation, because your staff are then going to lose trust. They're going to say, well, why is he the leader? This guy doesn't really understand the process. So you start to not track that from people's awareness, but you don't make it well known that you might not be as competent as you would hope you would be because you're moving into new workflows. And then I also don't want to tell my boss because, again, I don't want to be perceived to be incompetent upwards as well. So you don't message it downwards, you don't message it upwards. Now all of a sudden I'm kind of on an island. It's like, okay, well, like I've got to kind of figure this out on my own. And that was a little bit of the motivation for sharing that, because when Kirby Smart talked about like the loneliness of leadership, it can be very much a lonely place. Like I don't really get invited out to the team functions anymore. So if the strength coaches are going out, they're going to go out on their own. They don't want the boss with them. They want to have a good time. I think I'm a decent boss, right? But at the same time, you start to just become a little bit distant and from the day-to-days that you're so used to historically in other roles that I've been in prior to moving into senior leadership as I am right now. So that's kind of my perspective on it and how I've kind of what I've been challenged by over the last 7 to 10 years as I've moved into much more senior team leadership is just this whole paradigm of like being a little bit on an island, potentially being underskilled for what are very critical strategic workflows, budgeting, evaluations, strategic direction, all that type of thing that I didn't learn at university. I didn't learn that. I'm obviously considering potentially now. I have done some work in that space now, and I potentially need to do more, whether that's MBAs or whatever it may be. But executive leadership. But it's a real interesting thing that I don't think we're always ready for it to happen, and therefore it's a bit of a blind spot that we spoke about that you fall into, and you're like, holy cow, like I'm in this space now, and I'm not really ready for that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, thank you for your honesty, and just hearing you speak about it then, I'm sure so many of us listening will be nodding and having experienced the same. I remember I was thrown at the deep end where I went from being a academy assistant to basically running the cutter, heading up a department within professional sport by the age of 24. And was I ready? Absolutely not. And it's funny, it's that Peter principle, from what I understand, where you rise almost to your level of incompetence. But I guess the key thing is, going back to what we spoke about previously, if you've hired an individual with the right character and value fit, I'm sure they'll be resourceful, but they'll also have the raw ingredients to be able to make the most of that opportunity and to be able to grow from it. And it's clear that that's something that you've done very well, and I'm sure many others are tasked with. And to go back to the social side of it, it was exactly true. I went from being the same age as a lot of the players and their partners that I was working with, but as I made my way up within the space of about a year and a half from the previous position to the second position, I couldn't be out buying them beers the whole time and
right.
and socializing. And there is an element of loneliness without a doubt. But I guess the key thing is creating an environment at least where you feel like you can be authentic enough that people have the confidence in your abilities and your character to be able to find a way, but also to be able to ask. And I think that's something I've become more comfortable with as I've got older and naturally become less insecure. As you're a 24-year-old, you're still a boy, basically. And you're 32 now, I'm an adult, but it's something that's obviously continually develops. And I'm sure even people who are 60 will be sitting there experiencing imposter syndrome. It's something that we all experience. So thank you for sharing that.
No, it's more than happy to, and I think I don't pull my punches. I try to be authentic, and I think sharing experiences is the way to find a solution, right? And what it's done is definitely it allowed my network of others to help me and support me outside of this organization, right? So if I'm feeling on an island, well, there's a performance director over at this Major League Baseball team or a performance director at this ice hockey team, and they're picking up the phone and they're saying, hey, let's have a chat. How have you been? Everything going all right? So now I can start to get insight into their challenges and their problems. And it's just a different way of finding who your peers are. Like my peers, there aren't 20 senior vice presidents of performance at the UFC. There's one, that's me, right? So I've got to go and find those other people in my professional network and outside organizations. And then when I start listening to those guys, everyone's going through the same stuff, right? They're all going through their own stuff, which we can relate to. All right. And then we can start sharing methods and sharing ideas and things that have worked for them. And then I get that reinforcement back in a different way. But I mean, like I say, I try to be authentic and I try to understand where my weaknesses are. I think now I just look at myself, I'm coaching coaches. I was coaching athletes, but now I'm coaching coaches. So I've just repackaged it. Whereas before I was a little bit oh man, I'm not on the floor there working, getting all the banter and doing all that. So like now my job as a coach is to coach coaches, right? To coach them to be better coaches. So when I start packaging it like that, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. That's leadership, and that I can buy into that because then I can get back to my roots of how you're trying to optimize others. I'm just trying to optimize others in a different way, right? There's some learning on the fly, right? There's some learning on the fly of bits and pieces that are novel to leadership positions that I accept that. I've got to be better in some spaces. I've got to continue my professional development in some spaces. But holy shit, I'm still a coach. And I'll still be hopefully a great leader to others because I impart my coaching ideology that I imparted on athletes to my team. And hopefully I'm getting them fired up to be better coaches as I was firing up athletes to be world champions. You know what I mean?
Without a doubt. I guess one last question then, maybe off the back of that. What advice would you give to others, maybe even yourself, like founders or CEOs in similar high pressure leadership roles?
Yeah, I think I ask myself that quite regularly in my schizophrenic mind. I mean, I think the advice, I try not to be too harsh on myself. I try not to be too harsh on myself and say, you're doing a good job. You continue to drive the ship in the right direction and it's being recognized. And you don't know it all. You can never know it all. Okay. There's a reason why I've landed where I am, because of all the great things I've done, all the learnings that I've gone through and all the experience that I've aggregated. And, I'm very humble. I don't take it for granted, but I've done some great stuff. And that's why I'm here. And I am in a position of leadership. I am in a position of authority where I can make some pretty high level strategic decisions and manage, millions and millions of dollars in the performance space. So I'm doing something right. Okay. But there's one or two things that I just need to upskill on, which, okay, that was never part of where I came from. So that's an opportunity as well. And looking at things as opportunities. But I think I'm just more realistic with myself to say, you're not supposed to know it all. You're never going to know it all, because you are moving into essentially a different job role. And I take all the constituent parts of what I know I can do well, and that's maybe the 70%, and then there's 30%, which, all right, geez, I need to upskill pretty quickly. Does that mean I'm suddenly a bad leader or a bad person? No, actually, I'm pretty good at what I do, but I've got to just upskill on some things. And, I can either reach out to others and help. They can help direct me there. And there's no problem in doing that, because I know they're going to be totally empathetic to my situation and my scenario, because they're going through it themselves. And then that becomes a very collaborative and a positive thing. Do you know what I mean? Rather than saying, shit, I'm in my office, it's this dark room, I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm a complete fraud. Imposter syndrome is blowing up my head. What am I doing in this space? I want to get out of here. It's like, that's not what it's about, right? There's a reason why I've got to where I've got to, and I just kind of continue to reinforce that.
Humble confidence.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Nice.
Just trying positivity. Like, you got to put a positive spin on it, and I also try to garner a lot of feedback from my team, across the team, because again, those 360 feedbacks are invaluable to me. Like, even if it's a one-liner, like, I just want to know what your perception of me as a leader is. So again, if it's good or bad or indifferent, I have to take that, reframe it, and self-reflect. Because if it's just in my head and I'm the only one interrogating my work, that's not very impactful. So I try to do a lot of 360 reviews and feedback from my team members. I proactively outreach them and say, hey, can you just tell me what you think in these different areas? And I've had good reports and bad reports, and then I can action those.
No, that's awesome.
That's where I get psychological safety from, because I know that they're being honest with me, and that's super helpful for me to try and be a better leader to them. So.
Yeah, really valuable. I think it's something that doesn't necessarily always get utilized to the potential that there is with 360 feedback. The amount of times where it'll be provided and then no communication off the back of it, no explanation, no following up as to, okay, cool, I'm hearing this. How would you rather see this? What was it specifically that made you feel that way? And it's just a simpler way, isn't it? Rather than you trying to guess it in your head.
I find it hugely valuable. Hugely valuable. But again, I'm going into it by framing it in a very positive fashion. And if someone says something negative about me, there's going to be no retributions. I'm not going to flip out. It's like, shit, I need to do a better job. Okay, what can I do? All right, because it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is everyone's optic into the mission and what we're trying to do here is very different. And everyone's optic of me as a leader pushing the boat along, again, is coming through different optics and their own interpretation of, is it good? Is it bad? Is it indifferent? Are we working too hard? Are we not working hard enough? Are we being asked to do too many things, et cetera, et cetera? That's all everyone's momentary perspective on it. And I think what I've done as a leader is become way more balanced. I'm not as reactive. I'm a bit more like, a fridge that hums in the corner, and that white noise of just like, rather than the peaks and troughs of, we've done what? He's done what? She's done this? Oh, like, now we're failing. They've done what? And these peaks and troughs of reacting to team members' momentary perspectives on what's happening. Like, at that moment in time, to a team member, whatever the issue is, that's going to be their most important thing. But to me, I'd detach myself a little bit, and I try to look at both sides of the fence, trying to interpret what's happened, see how we move forwards. We create a resolution or create a solution to move forwards without the need for the emotional response, because the staff member is having the emotional response, and I have to be a little bit more impartial to that to make sure that the organization keeps moving in the direction it needs to go.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant, without a doubt. Are you happy if we finish on a little word association? If I give you 10 words, keep it nice and simple.
I'll see what I'm out. Go on then.
People normally Google because they think it's a stitch up, but I promise there's nothing I'm dropping here that's controversial.
All right, let's go.
Awesome. So the first word is team.
Everything.
Culture.
Critical.
Purpose.
Reason. Vital.
Innovation.
Helpful.
Diversity.
Important.
MMA.
In one word, warriors.
Surfing.
Passion.
Family.
Everything.
Legacy.
Legacy. Nice to have.
It's 3, but we'll take it. It's really interesting.
Like, I don't think I'm on this. I would love to have a legacy. I would love to know what my legacy is going to be. But I'm not living every day to try and create a legacy. I'm just trying to be a better person, you know.
It's funny because I've put that in with a few others in almost every single episode that's been recorded so far. We've recorded 8. And it's the same answer to legacy each and every time, which I find quite interesting. It's never around creating this, this thing that's going to outlive them and their name's going to be up on a plaque. So it's funny. There's definitely a common theme there.
I also don't think we can't decide if we have a legacy or not. That's for others to decide, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. The other thing he said was team and family, and I said everything twice. So my family and my team.
That's right. Well, it's 7:15 in the evening, so I'm not picking up on that, you'll say.
Go, man.
Duncan, it's been brilliant, as always. Absolutely love chatting. Some fascinating stories and insights. So much for everyone that's listening to take away. So genuinely, really appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time.
Awesome, Henry. Always good to connect. Thanks for everything you're doing.
Hey everyone, so I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Duncan. There's a lot of takeaways within it. What we're going to do though is break it down into 3 specific ones. So the first takeaway is the importance of diversity in challenging status quo. Duncan himself said we need an environment that breeds thought leaders and people that can challenge the status quo. With the Performance Institute team being made up of experts from a variety of disciplines and sports and continents, Duncan has walked the walk in regards to hiring individuals from various backgrounds, and it's been really crucial to their rapid evolution. So one way that you can do this within your own team is to reverse engineer who you're hiring. Look at your team members right now. What are their strengths and weaknesses? Then hire people who align with your values but bring different strengths, perspectives, and experiences to the table. Now, it's likely that with different perspectives comes increased conflict, but conflict is needed to challenge status quo and rapidly evolve. So alongside communicating the importance of conflict with your team, one way to ensure that it remains productive is to focus conflict on the team's processes rather than individuals themselves. Remember, process, not person-focused conflict leads to productive outcomes. So takeaway number 2 is innovating with limited time. Duncan himself said you do have a finite amount of time, so you have to be super effective in regards to the return on investment from any engagement in regards to this. An example that he gave was basically the swift creation of Fight Island, where the UFC turned COVID-19 from something which could have crippled the sport to a case study on how to out-innovate your challenges. Similar to Pixar's Brain Trust, you can emulate this by creating a cross-department team dedicated to providing rapid, diverse perspectives on each team's challenges. Now, there is likely to be a pushback when introducing an extra meeting within the week or fortnight, but to combat this, you can ensure there's a high reward for the time invested. So to achieve this, basically allow a representative from each department to bring their greatest current challenge. You can allocate 3 minutes towards presenting the problem and the constraints, and then 7 minutes for brainstorming solutions from the diverse range of perspectives in the room. Research shows that constraints lead to greater innovation as we're forced to think outside of the box. And the last takeaway, number 3, was creating an environment where people feel valued and empowered. Duncan himself said that people need to feel like they have a voice, like they can influence the outcome, and they need responsibility. And a simple way of giving people the responsibility, autonomy, and voice they need to thrive is to create a culture of 360 feedback. But encouraging participation and feedback can be challenging. An example is when IBM transformed its performance review system to a more open and continuous feedback model, which was initially met with skepticism. This can be overcome, though, by ensuring anonymity at the start and closing the feedback loop by explaining how the team or organization are acting on any feedback received to build the belief that they are listening and value their people. So thanks for listening again, guys, from both Alex and I. Really hope you enjoyed the episode, and we're looking forward to cracking into the next one for you.